Sami, what is up, brother? I'm so glad to be chatting with you today. Thank you so much for making time to bring some wisdom and knowledge to the podcast.
Well, Nate, thank you so much for inviting and super excited to be here.
Yeah. So for anyone who's not familiar with you or with Virta Health, your company, can you just give us a little bit of background? I know you were a triathlete, you were diagnosed with prediabetes, and now you work with helping people reverse type 2 diabetes. Can you get a little into the backstory there?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first, just to put the headline out there. So I'm a co-founder and CEO of Virta Health. And what we are not just trying to do, but are in the process of doing is solving the biggest health epidemic of our generation, which is type 2 diabetes and obesity. And we do that with a combination of not new drugs, but combination of nutrition and technology, telemedicine specifically. So that's what we are here to do at Virta, and have been doing that for nearly a decade now, about 9 years. But in terms of how this came about, I'm probably a reasonably unlikely founder or co-founder for Virta Health. So I grew up in Finland on a farm, physicist by training, started my career in a nuclear power plant. Obviously, not much to do with healthcare. Then came to America 2003, so I've been here for 21 years. And prior to Virta, co-founded a technology company, or you could say internet company, Trulia, which is now part of Zillow. So if anyone's into finding a home or looking at real estate online, I co-founded Trulia 2004 and then went public and merged with Zillow. So I give you all that background just to highlight that, healthcare and trying to reverse diabetes or solve obesity certainly wasn't something that I was thinking all my life.
You didn't start off as a personal trainer, in other words.
No, I did not. But I should add that if you had asked me about a decade ago, let's say 12 years ago, how about we go and solve obesity and type 2 diabetes? Honestly, I would have rolled my eyes and said, ridiculous. Like, that's impossible. If you have obesity and or you're struggling with type 2 diabetes, blame yourself. Blame yourself. And I'm embarrassed to say this because what ended up happening to me personally, despite doing a decades of endurance sports, and I was training and racing pretty high level in triathlon. I won the world championships in triathlon in my age group and did the Hawaii Ironman world championship 7 times. So I was very fit. We're talking 2010, 11, 12. And the reason I mentioned that is I always thought, well, I don't have to deal with diabetes, obesity. I'm high willpower, endurance athlete. I stay lean. But all that changed in my mind when I discovered that I was actually on my way to type 2 diabetes, and I already had prediabetes myself. And that was 2012. And I went, what the F? I'm not one of those lazy people living in the middle of America. What's going on here? And so that and I had left my operational role at Truly, my previous company, and so I went, something's just not adding up here. I'm exercising. I think I'm eating healthy, and here I am, metabolically unhealthy, pre-diabetes. And then,
Are you still training triathlons, Ironmans at the time?
Yeah, 12, 13 hours a week. I did my last Ironman 2013. So long story short, in my frustration, I met a couple of scientists, particularly Dr. Stephen Finney, who then became my Virta co-founder. And, he had done research for decades on carbohydrate metabolism and fat metabolism, and he's Stanford-trained medical doctor and PhD from MIT in nutritional biochemistry. So he knew what he was talking about.
Sharp dude.
Peer-reviewed papers in New England Journal of Medicine and so forth. And basically, I learned 2 things from him, which then convinced me that there is a way to reverse diabetes nutritionally and help people lose weight sustainably. And the 2 things I learned was, one, embarrassingly, I was wrong. I was completely wrong. Obesity, diabetes, it's not a personal choice. It is a metabolic disease, and largely because people don't know what to eat to stay healthy and what makes you sick. And then secondly, that even though basically all traditional diet exercise programs have failed because it's all about willpower, and willpower runs out latest at the wedding photo, I became convinced that it's possible to use nutrition to reverse diabetes and lose weight if and only if you can also eliminate hunger and cravings, because willpower, again, runs out. So when I kind of saw with my own eyes and was convinced about the science that you can use nutrition to restore metabolic health, I said, hey, let's go. We can save millions of people if we figure out a way to support them. And obviously my background was in tech, so I was convinced that we can use telemedicine and smartphone apps and kind of give the support that's needed to individualize the nutrition treatment. Then on a daily basis, give the support, individualization, and encouragement. I said, let's go. And we started Virta. It was 2014, and now almost a decade later, we can talk about where we are as a company. But irrefutably, I can say reversing type 2 diabetes and helping people lose weight nutritionally is not an anomaly. You don't need to be a superwoman or superman. We can succeed with almost anyone.
So I want to get into some of like the results that you're seeing through Virta and what, like where you see this going. But I want to go back to something you said earlier and play maybe devil's advocate here, where you said metabolic disease and obesity, type 2 diabetes is not a choice. It's a lack of knowledge around what to be eating to maintain a healthy weight. Now, I would say that if I put a bunch of food on a table and I had the general populace look at it, they'd be able to identify that a pizza is not healthy, but an apple is healthy, and, like we can talk all about like apples and insulin and blood sugar and all that sort of thing. But I would say that most people can know the difference between like kale and nachos. So how do you start like bringing that knowledge base that I think that we all have like an intrinsic idea, whether or not we're choosing to eat oats in the morning is one thing, but like we have an intrinsic idea of how to avoid eating processed foods. We know that's not good for us. How are you getting people to actually adopt those habits, especially long term?
Yeah, absolutely. And I partially I agree with you, and then partially I disagree with you. And
I think we should focus on the disagreement because that makes for way better content.
Yeah. Okay. No, totally. And make it the headline and the soundbite for the whole thing. I'll start from the agreement, partial agreement, I guess, which is that our default food environment, or actually, maybe this is a disagreement, actually. Our default food environment, I don't like to use the word toxic, but the default food environment, meaning what's the default option, even at schools, at restaurants, hotel buffet breakfasts, is so bad that it basically messes up your metabolic health. So I'll give you an example. And this ties into people don't know any better. I think many people will think that they stay, in a nice, Days Inn, and there's a free breakfast buffet, and there's like, this is pretty good food. So let's see what it is. It's orange juice, free orange juice, free waffles, free honey. Honey is healthy, right? It's organic sugar, right? It's cornflakes or breakfast cereals, skim milk, and then maybe a bagel and some jam. Now that
200 grams of carbs for breakfast.
Yeah, that for many people that is like, that's a pretty healthy. That's not pizza. That's not fatty sausage. That's not a cake. But I know that is 100% processed carbohydrates, and within seconds, it in your mouth, it all turns into glucose, which is literally. It's not poison, but if you want to develop type 2 diabetes, you want to marinate your body and brain in constant glucose. So that's an example of our default food environment. And by the way, airplanes are the same thing. It's crackers, it's cookies, it's granola bars. Here's soda, here's juice, here's skim milk. Like it's pure sugar. So I would say that the default food environment may appear for some people reasonably healthy, but it's the worst thing you could be doing yourself. So just very, very briefly, when we start treating someone at Virta, obviously we first want to understand where your health is, your metabolic health, and what's wrong. And did you come to Virta for weight loss or reversing type 2 diabetes? Want to understand your food allergies and so forth in order to individualize. But at the core of what we do is we want to bring your carbohydrate intake below your personal tolerance level so that we get to a point where you are actually not craving food all the time. And when you're not craving food all the time, it's easier to then tell you, okay, what's the healthy stuff? And the healthy stuff, in fact, you should be eat to satiety. And over time, and usually this happens pretty quickly, people start craving the quote unquote healthy food, the good options. And they realize that going into the breakfast buffet with, 100% sugar, glucose, carbs is actually the worst thing. And you choose not to go that way.
Okay. So there's it's a pretty big jump between like kind of that knowledge, or you're educating people, you're bringing their carb load below the threshold for tolerance you mentioned. It's kind of a sidebar here. This is called the low carb hustle. You obviously advocate for a low carb approach. What is low carb to you? Is it individual dependent? In my mind, low carb is always like under 100 grams of carbs is what I consider low carb.
Yeah, I am tempted to give a number, but I'll give you the true answer, which is it depends. It absolutely depends. However, given practically all of the members or patients we treat at Virta are metabolically pretty unhealthy. So anyway, from I've had type 2 diabetes for 20 years. I've been taking an insulin shot for 3 times a day for the last decade. So that's kind of, and my A1C, average blood sugar, by the way, you want to have it below like 5.7 and certainly below the diabetes limit of 6.7%. But we have people who come in at 10, 11, which is just insane. It's almost like, honey.
Like you said, marinating in glucose.
Yeah, exactly. So that's one end of the spectrum. And then, maybe people come for weight loss reasons, but oftentimes they want to and need to lose like 50, 60, 70 pounds. So these are people who are really pretty metabolically unhealthy. For those individuals, in order to achieve the point where you are not craving food all the time and you are not unnecessarily hungry, and in order to start getting your glucose down, in order to start reversing your insulin resistance, we usually have to go under, at least initially, under 50 grams a day of total carbohydrates, which for someone who eats that days-in breakfast buffet may be like, that's crazy. Like, how do you even get there? But
yeah, that's like a quarter of breakfast.
Exactly. But it's absolutely doable when people realize that, I can eat a beautiful steak with creamed spinach and maybe even a dry glass of wine for dinner. They're like, oh my God, I eat like a queen or king. This isn't restrictive, as long as they understand like how you can replace what they may have been eating before with the healthier option.
Yeah, and I agree that like once you start understanding what kinds of foods you can eat, you can absolutely eat like just feast all the time and be completely metabolically healthy, get all the foods you want. But it really requires you letting go of this idea that nachos or pizza is somehow this like comfort food that is really bringing you happiness and really releasing that dopamine addiction we have towards those highly processed foods. And like you were talking about with the environment of nutrition right now being almost toxic, it's kind of like propaganda, right? It's just all around us all the time. And we're seeing the advertisements. We're seeing it on television. It's a healthy part of a complete breakfast. And they show the orange juice and the Fruit Loops and the bagel and the waffle and the banana and the everything else. And so it's hard for us to get out of that mindset. So what are you doing to help people from a mindset perspective to shift their viewpoints? Because I feel like there's a couple different ways of doing this. One is that doctor being like, hey, you got 3 months to live unless you fix something, that come to Jesus moment. Yeah. And the other way I tend to focus on with my clients is those consistent small little steps that are done over time until it becomes a habit, becomes something that you're just automatic with. How are you seeing success with the mindset piece and manipulating people's like dopamine level, serotonin, to be able to stop focusing so highly on those processed feel-good foods?
Yeah, well, first I should say, if anyone's listening, they're like, oh my God, there's no way I could give up, fill in the blank, like a sweets or potatoes. I'm totally addicted to sweet or candy or carbs or crackers or bread or whatever. You're not alone. We've now helped more than 100,000 American adults formerly without treatment, and I can tell you, by the way, this applies to me as well. Well, 100% of the people, individuals, joining Virta as a patient, one, they have tried 5 to 15 different diets, a dozen or dozens of times, and failed basically 100% of the time. So they come in with this idea that there's no way anything will work for me. I don't want to fail again. Like, it's impossible. So that's one. And the second one is, I would say also 100% of people come in and say, there is no way I can give up X. And I understand that. I personally thought like that. It's kind of like if you're a smoker and say like, oh, just stop smoking. It's like, there's no freaking way. Like, I am addicted. I need this stuff. So that's kind of a starting point. Like, that is our assumption, and it's kind of the reality. Like, if you're used to eating certain things that are addictive and make you crave, such as, cookies, crackers, whatnot, that have sugar, the mindset is there's no way I've tried, but I've always failed. So how is it possible? So what do we do is there's a couple of things. One, we actually help people understand why that is the case. And one of the key things is we literally explain the science. And we say, it's not you. You are not a failure. It's not because of your willpower, despite what you may have thought or what some people say, like, it's your fault. So it starts from understanding that our biology is fighting against us. And we are basically carbohydrate intolerant if we eat too much of that stuff. So that's kind of our step one. We explain what's behind there. Then the step two is we say, okay, well, here's how we can switch you off from that addiction. Here's what we can do. And here's what it takes. Like, how do you change your meals and how do you change your whatnot? And only after we've explained why and what to do we have a conversation like, okay, when do we start? Is it tomorrow, a week from now? So we basically prime the individual to know that it's possible. Past failure was not their fault. Everyone has failed. And there's a way, there's a method, there's a science, there's a way out of this. And it's steps 1, 2, 3, 4, whatever that is. And then when we start, we go into this sort of implementation phase where we say, okay, well, here's what we have to change. And then let's find the negotiables. Like, maybe you are like, okay, we have a family, I don't know, we eat rice and beans every Friday, or we have pizza every whatever. Let's find an alternative. And there's ways to still have the pizza night, maybe early when your carbohydrate intake has to be low. It's a cauliflower pizza or something like that. And we double down on the fat and protein instead of all the things that add carbs. Maybe there's almond flour crust or whatever that is. So that's kind of the approach that we take. But the most important is the first two steps, where we bring the pressure down, explain that your past failure was not because of you. You just didn't know any better. This is not a willpower exercise. This is literally a biology exercise. And there's a way out of this. And then people go like, okay, well, if your science truly is true, maybe it's just a matter of kind of like following ABC. So
it sounds like the first step is you give hope.
Yes.
You're saying it's not your fault. You've tried it before. Many people have tried before and failed. It's going to be different this time. And then the second piece, you provide clarity and education. Hey, here's how we're going to do it. Here's how we can make those substitutions. Here's what we can do when those like hunger pangs strike. Yeah,
absolutely. And then of course, once we start the treatment, everyone's journey is different. But what I will tell is, because people who haven't been our patients are wondering like, well, how do they stay? Like, most lifestyle programs, individuals stay, if they stay on it for 6 months, it's like winning Olympic gold. It's like winning Olympic gold. Well, the average person on Virta stays for more than 30 months. So we're talking like 3 years. Some people leave early because they lose insurance coverage, because we work with employers and health plans and some government entities. So actually our treatment is free for the individuals. So then if they suddenly change an employer and lose the coverage, then they're like, well, I can't pay out of pocket. So that's kind of a separate reason. But people stay for a very long time. And the reason is, one of the key reasons is, they start to see tangible results very quickly. And this could be, I literally have been sticking a needle of insulin to my body 3 times a day for a decade. And in 60 days, you're completely off. Or I sleep through the night the first time for 5 years because of sleep apnea and all kinds of things. Or I can't believe I don't need to take a nap at 3 p.m. And if you have fit listeners, they're like, who are these people? Well, this is an average American experience. Like, literally 60% of Americans are now obese and have prediabetes or type 2 diabetes. Their life is not great. And so when you suddenly come out of it and go, how is this possible? In 30 days, I've got the energy that I had in high school. In 4 weeks, you may have lost 10, 14 pounds. So it's kind of a good start for many people. you get off the diabetes medications, you go, this is ridiculous. Like, why would I not keep doing this? And by the way, simultaneously, you're not hungry. You're not thinking about food 11 times a day as you used to before. So these
11?
benefits kick
That feels
in.
low.
No, yeah. Maybe it's like constantly. So it's an infinite amount, infinite number of times per day.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like people are snacking 11 times per day sometimes when I'm talking to them. Okay, sounds great. Love this idea. But also, like you're talking about people doing 5 to 15 different diets. This is not the first low carb diet they've tried. Low carb is very popular, like between like keto, carnivore, just like a straight low carb, even like a paleo diet tends to be on the lower carb side of things. What makes Virta unique in your approach? And can you touch on how you focus on eliminating hunger cravings? Because I feel like that sounds like one of the key things that most people deal with when they're going through caloric restriction and a diet.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, what makes Virta different for the individuals and the business entities we work with, and what makes Virta different as a lifestyle-based health program or nutrition program is it actually works. And I know that sounds kind of obnoxious, it works, but it works on a population level. We've run a prospective clinical trial with 1-year results, 5-year results, 2-year published peer-reviewed results, and I like to say that we deliver Ozempic-like results
I want to get into that for sure.
Without the drug. So,
and you've worked with, you said you've had over 100,000 people have been successful on your program. So you obviously have a massive like body of work and like statistics and things to pull from. So,
but to peel underneath, why it works is obviously results is one, is kind of a proof point that it absolutely works. But why it works is a couple of key tenets is, number one is very high degree of individualization. Very high, including, how many grams of carbohydrates you have per day. But more importantly, we work with Native American tribes. Many of these folks work in casinos. What we tell them to eat is obviously different from someone who may shop at Whole Foods every day and cook at home. Also, if you come in and you say, I'm a vegan by identity or religion or whatever, we can't tell them to have bacon for breakfast because they would leave immediately. And these are kind of silly examples. We work with US Foods, big Fortune 500 company. Most of their employees, our patients, are truck drivers. They only have access to food at the highway stops. So we can't tell them, buy organic grass-fed beef and spinach and fry.
Make yourself a nice omelet. Yeah.
It just doesn't. So one is high degree of individualization, which obviously technology allows. We assign a coach for each individual. We assign a medical doctor who's our full-time employee for them as well. So enabled by people and technology is a high degree of individualization. So that's one reason. Second is the feedback loop and intensity that we have. And what I mean by feedback loop is we collect biomarkers remotely on a daily basis. This is blood glucose, blood ketones, weight. So unlike a normal case where you may go see a primary care doctor, they say, hey, you should kind of lose a little weight and eat healthy, and here's a list of things to do and list of things not to do. Come back in 3 months. Well, we know what happens. Like 6 days later, the person is off the track. So we collect these biomarkers on a daily basis, and not as a kind of a big brother watching, but we know if you are on or off track very objectively, literally nearly on an hourly basis. So then we can go back 2 days later, message you and say, we think you may have had too much protein because XYZ has happened. What do you think we adjust, whatever, your breakfast or dinner? So that's the second reason why it works. And then the third one is, I just to literally give credit to my scientific co-founders. Yeah, you can Google low carb or ketogenic diet or whatnot, and you get 1,000 different answers. And not to throw anyone under the bus, but 999 of those thousands, it's bullshit. And my scientific co-founders have 3 decades of experience just running clinical trials in a clinical practice to fine-tune the things that you have to get right. And yeah, it's not rocket science, but it certainly is science. Things like how do you optimize sodium and magnesium and what type of fats can you actually tolerate. And there's a lot of nuance to make a nutrition program sustainable, enjoyable, over long periods of time. And so I think those 3 combinations or things are the reason why we have been able to be so successful, where, we all know people who are like, oh, I'm on this perfect diet, but highly educated, smart people. And then 4 months later, wheels come off the bus and they're back to their old habits, and everything kind of falls apart.
Can you give us a little bit more of a look under the hood in terms of decreasing hunger cravings?
Yeah, that
Or
was
is
the
that
second part of your question.
is
So
that
I will answer. No, I will totally answer. Well, honestly, it really starts from number one thing. And this is very exciting and counterintuitive to almost all of our patients. And it's also part of the initial education and hope. And here's the thing: we counsel our patients to eat to satiety, not excessively over it. But this is it's like mind-blowingly new concept for anyone who's tried to diet and lose weight nutritionally. It's like, wait a second, you're telling me to eat until I'm like just about full? And we say yes. And you should never leave the table hungry. And if you eat the right things in just a matter of days, you will stop overeating. And this is like a mind-blowing thing for people. And so I would say that's one of the key reasons how we eliminate hunger and cravings. Furthermore, as we fine-tune, collect the biomarkers, this usually happens in the first 2 weeks. People are like, oh, I'm kind of like, and we do not encourage snacking excessively, certainly.
was
And
my
so
next
if people
question.
are hungry, if people are hungry between, say, a lunch and dinner, guess what we tell them? We say,
Bigger lunch.
exactly, add some, usually it's like, if this is right amount of protein, we may say like, you should be more generous with the olive oil or whatever that healthy fat might be there. So we encourage them to eat more, which again, if you're on a traditional diet program, this is like music, refreshing music to people's ears. Like, oh my God, thank God you're not telling me that, oh, go for a walk so you forget that you're hungry. And these are the kind of old school tactics. Drinks 5 glasses of water and go for a walk. Maybe you forget that you're hungry. Well, that's bullshit. That doesn't work. That's not human biology. So
Even
that's
if
the
it
most
does work,
important.
it's still that willpower. It's still that like mental fortitude that eventually will give out if you just keep
100%.
pressing in that
100%.
arena.
So that's the number one thing. Like, eat to satiety. Now, then underneath it, I can tell you, you may have tried. I have tried as an athlete. If you eat, say, processed carbs and cookies until you're not hungry, guess what? 45 minutes later, you're hungry. And so, obviously, telling people to eat the right things, which is right amount of protein, food that has the right micronutrients. So we usually counsel our patients to eat 5 servings of vegetables a day. And you don't need to be perfect. It doesn't need to be organic, the greatest and most expensive thing. Just try to get 5 servings of vegetables. Why? Well, first of all, you get the certain micronutrients, which then help also with satiety. You need that. And then obviously, if you only eat protein and fat, it's kind of a boring diet, and it's difficult to get the calories even in. But yeah, we counsel people to eat the right things, which then will give you the satiety without making you overeat. When you combine those two things, it just, that's how hunger and cravings go away. And I will say one more thing. People have this, and I use sweeteners myself. Like, it can be helpful for people to say, like, why don't you just take a week of nothing, like no diet sodas and no stevias and xylitols and whatever sweeteners you might use. But I personally like to add some sweetener to my coffee, for example. So we do help our patients to find sort of a sustainable lifestyle with some sweet things, and maybe you have whipped cream and berries and sweeten it with, it's kind of a non-calorie and non-sugar sweetener. But too much of those things can, and we've seen this, can sort of trigger unnecessary cravings again. So this is an example of individualization, where we kind of iterate in a cycle and say, yeah, if you're sort of spiking your sweet tooth 4 times a day, maybe that's too much for you. So let's keep the sweetener in, I don't know, afternoon coffee or morning coffee or whatever that might be for you.
I love this philosophy. And I think this is one of my philosophies that I work with my clients on, is the no snacking eat bigger meals, eat the right foods, and then eat till you're full. So when I give people recipes, I give them guidelines around nutrition. I often get a lot of pushback from people who are chronic dieters, and they're like, well, how much broccoli should I be eating? How much chicken should I be having? And I'm like, I'm not going to tell you because I want you to eat until you're satiated. I don't want you to leave hungry. And well, I feel very like vindicated when you said that. So, but it's also like, it's hard for people to wrap their minds around that, having been in a chronic dieting state where they're only allowed a half cup of green beans or something.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
that
Absolutely.
is like, it's very counter diet culture, but I believe that what leads to intuitive eating, which I believe is one
Yeah.
of the things that we need to promote for long-term sustainable success. And it sounds like
Yeah.
you're teaching that methodology as well.
Yeah, and this is not science, but I like to use this analogy in terms of like knowing and how the body knows what to eat. First question: do you have children yourself?
Yes.
Yes.
Yep.
Okay. Well, congratulations. So I have two little girls, 7 and 9 year olds, and obviously human race has existed for hundreds of thousands of years. We have absolutely perfectly survived. In fact, we've thrived as a human race for hundreds of thousands of years with no apps, no CGMs, no food logs, no nothing, no complex thinking on food. Guess why? Because our system, obviously brain, cravings, have absolutely evolved perfectly. So when I look at my two little girls, we feed them just real food as much as they can eat. And guess what? Their appetite is a perfect mechanism. They're a little sick. Maybe for 2 days they don't want to eat too much, and then they like eat like crazy for 3 days to catch up, and then they find their equilibrium, and then they sometimes crave a little different. But as long as you eat just real food, doesn't need to be complex in any way. And when I say real food, that is not Captain Crunch for breakfast or soda. um, our bodies tell us, and of course it tells us, because we would not have survived for hundreds of thousands of years. And this, again, I'm not trying to say like, just look into history and you can solve all the world's problems, but just to think like from first principles, we have a system that tells us. The problem is that our food environment is so backwards that if you take the random option at a gas station, it's going to mess up your metabolic health, it's going to mess up your cravings, it's going to mess up everything. But if you go back to just simply eating real food, your body will tell you when you're full. And then maybe 6 hours later, you want to have another meal. And that's enough. And that's, I think with children, I look at them and I'm like, and then when they're growing, they may have a month that they eat like crazy. And you're like, oh my God, you just grew an inch in a month. And then again,
100%.
appetite goes down. And it's well-regulated system to the calorie, like literally to the calorie.
Yeah, they know. Well, our rule in our house is always we provide, kids decide, sort of thing. So like we put food on their plate, they eat as much or as little of it as they want to. If they don't want to eat the green beans, that's fine. We don't force it, but there's not going to be much, like there's no desserts or anything after that if you're not hungry enough to eat that sort of thing. And I think that works out really well because my son last night, he ate like nothing on his plate. And then this morning, big, huge breakfast. So
yes,
it's fun to like see them doing that and like see them like trusting their own instincts when it comes to food, especially when you're feeding them mostly whole foods. So
yeah, and I think you want to talk about GLP-1s, so maybe this is a bridge there, but I will just mention that only when you mess up the metabolic health with not real food do you need the quote-unquote patches and all this complex, like dealing with childhood obesity. Then we need to throw GLP-1s and CGMs and food logs and crap and this and that. Those are patches when the foundational and fundamental root cause of this epidemic of our generation, which is type 2 diabetes and obesity, is literally food, simply food. We mess up what's there working and should be working, which is our metabolic health that then drives sufficient hunger and sufficient cravings. But then we are trying to fix it by dealing with all these symptoms, which is completely backwards.
Can you talk a bit more about GLP-1s? Because I've talked to people all the time, like some of them are clients, some of them are just, we're just having a chat, talking about it, giving some advice and stuff. And the people that are taking GLP-1s, what they tell me is that they like it because they are not hungry. Like it basically, one of the biggest things for them is that they just are not dealing with cravings, or they'll eat a little bit and be completely full. but we know that GLP-1s slow down the digestive process. And we don't have like a large body of work right now or people to look at from a long-term effects of what's happening when you slow down a massive system of the body. Can you dive into that a little bit more?
Yeah, absolutely. And interestingly, so we co-founded Virta 2014, really got going 2015. So we now actually have about 9 years of experience using telemedicine to de-prescribe and sometimes in a narrow cases prescribe GLP-1s. So we have almost a decade of experience using GLP-1s, seeing what happens, how to titrate people off of it, seeing the side effects. And so we actually have an interesting body of data on what happens and how do you take people off of them and how do you sustain weight loss after GLP-1s nutritionally. And I'm happy to share some of those insights. The other thing I would add before I go into those insights is, so anyone who's listening like, oh, is this a new class of drugs? Yes and no. So the first GLP-1s in America were approved for treating type 2 diabetes in 2005 by FDA, 2005. So actually the GLP-1 drug, class of drugs has existed nearly 20 years. Just as a footnote, you might ask a question, well, are all the people with type 2 diabetes now skinny and healthy? Did diabetes go away in the last 20 years? Nope, we have more of it. It's more expensive. People are sicker. So anyway, that's just kind of a little bit tongue in cheek, but clearly GLP-1s didn't sort of solve the diabetes.
It didn't fix the issue.
It did not fix the issue. The new thing, and why everybody's talking about Ozempic now, is that about 2-3 years ago, the first GLP-1 drug was specifically FDA approved to treat obesity, weight loss. And it was the same molecule as Ozempic, which is a type 2 drug. It's called semaglutide by Novo Nordisk, and the brand name is Wegovy. So anyway, it's just a little bit of a history if this is new for anyone. So the reason everyone's talking about it is not because the molecule or the class of drugs is new. That's 20 years old, give or take. But that now it's approved for obesity, and about 150 million Americans, which blows my mind, clinically qualified by the FDA label for GLP-1s, which is insane. So treating obesity, about 150 million Americans theoretically could get a prescription from their medical doctor if they choose that this is the right thing for you. Okay, so finally to these insights. First, I should say there are reasons to be excited about GLP-1s for obesity. So, and hopefully I don't come across as anti-pharmaceutical, and we are certainly pro-science and Western science and anything. And the reason I say there's reasons to be excited is that obesity is a big problem, so that's one reason. Second thing is historically, obesity drugs have had a lot of side effects and like all kinds of heart issues and addiction, basically weight loss drugs have not worked. So this class of drugs, GLP-1s, is definitely safer and the efficacy is better than the past obesity drugs. So that's the second reason to be excited. And the third reason to be excited is what you said. If you talk to people who are on these drugs, why do they work? Yes, you get the answer that you said, which is, I'm just not hungry. I'm just not hungry. And that is true, but that's the problem. Here's the problem. These drugs fundamentally change how much you eat. However, what they don't change is what you eat. And unless you fix the what you eat, you are literally just putting Band-Aid on a problem. And
or you're burning through muscle mass and just keeping
all kinds of. I'm not even going to list all the side effects. And here's the proof point: even the manufacturers of these drugs, all the trials that they've run and published data, weight loss is like a V-shaped curve. The second you come off these drugs, on average, your weight bounces back. And typically, this is a little bit more anecdotal, but what I've read and looked at the kind of like the actual details, you lose a huge amount of muscle mass, which could be 30 to 60% of the weight loss. So you lose 50 pounds, 25 pounds might be muscle. Then you gain back, guess what you gain back more? Yes, fat. And so, again, appropriate excitement, obesity, big problem, these drugs are better than, but the problem is they don't change what you eat. So you have to, if you end up using these drugs, and by the way, most people only use them for short term, like the data is out, many pharmacy benefit managers or PBMs have published data. Less than 30% of people who start GLP-1 stay a year. Bunch of Blues health plans, their consortium published data. I think their data was less than 40% stay past 16 weeks, 16 or 12 weeks. So most people come off and then weight bounces back. So you have to have something, and self-serving advertisement, something like Virta Health, that helps you to change what you eat. And I'll just finish one more thing, then you can ask follow-up questions. If you change to what you eat, this drug for a small group of people can be helpful if nothing else has helped, particularly in the beginning. So, and here's the hopeful note. I think we're the only company in the world that has now published peer-reviewed data that when we get people 100% off of Ozempic, this is the 10-year history that we have, we can maintain that weight loss for at least a year purely nutritionally. And we can put a link into this peer-reviewed paper. It's in Diabetes Therapy. It's possible, but it only works when we initiate the nutrition therapy with the drug, so we can titrate you off the drug. Then two things have happened simultaneously: changing what you eat, and we've gotten your hunger and cravings in control, either with or without the drug. And then once you come off the drugs, hunger and cravings don't return. And you have to, if you don't do that, this drug is just a yo-yo. It's basically a roller coaster ride.
And you don't get many of roller coaster rides. I feel like people can do massive weight loss like 3 times in their life before you're just completely metabolically unhealthy. And then it's the Biggest Loser syndrome,
100%.
where you have to exercise for an hour plus every single day and you're on 1,200 calories for the rest of your life. Otherwise that weight bounces back because you've plummeted and gotten up so many times that your body has impossible to readapt to a healthy weight.
Well, 100%. So yeah, I don't know what else to talk about on GLP-1s, but again, I think it's a tool in the obesity toolkit that is, for better or worse, I think mostly for the better, is here to stay, but it is just an A tool. Mm-hmm. The way I see it, and the evidence is supporting this, is the 3 main tools in the obesity toolkit is, number 1 is nutrition. That's evidence-based and with the right support and what we talked about the last 30 minutes. And that's applicable to everyone. After that, maybe GLP-1s, if the nutrition didn't work, but then you still have to wrap around some sort of a nutrition program that works around the drug so that you have an off-ramp. So that's the second tool. And then thirdly, hopefully very few people, but I think it's still a tool in the toolkit, is bariatric surgery, which has some decent evidence works. I think if we fast forward 10 years in America, I think that is the toolkit. So it's nutrition first, maybe for some people GLP-1s, maybe for a very small group of people bariatric surgery. I'm pretty sure that's where we'll end up. Unfortunately, if you just read popular press and social media, there's this narrative that we have a magic pill or magic injection that's called GLP-1 that's going to solve obesity. That's just not happening. That 100%, even if we put GLP-1s into the tap water, although the molecule won't really survive, it is not a solution to our obesity epidemic, no matter how much the pharma companies would like to promote that idea, because it's $1 trillion opportunity for them. It is not a solution.
One point I want to kind of highlight that you made earlier is that, if you're doing GLP-1s, if you're doing bariatric surgery, if you're doing any of these things to accelerate your progress, you end up at nutrition. You always have to end up at nutrition. So if you're going to be going that route, just go with the nutrition. Start off there rather than injecting an exogenous substance into your body, rather than doing some sort of surgery where you're taking out part of your stomach or your digestive tract. Because you have to end up at nutrition anyways, eventually. So I think that's a really, really good point, and I don't think enough people are talking about that. So Sami, thank you so much.
Yeah.
I really have appreciated having you on the podcast today. A lot of these questions I feel like I was asking kind of based off of people I've talked to recently and some clients I've had. And there's a lot I wanted to get into around Alzheimer's and type 3 diabetes and CGMs and stuff like that. But man, you've been a wealth of knowledge, and I've really appreciated having you on the show. Is there anything you want to leave us with before we go today?
Yeah, well, I would say anyone interested in improving their metabolic health, and if we spark this idea that, hey, you can reverse diabetes and obesity without suffering and willpower, just Google Virta Health, Virta, Virta Health. We have so much free content. You don't have to pay anything on YouTube and on our website. And if you're lucky enough, we work with many Fortune 500 companies and health plans. The treatment might be free if you want to join. Like any employee health plan we work with, like it doesn't cost anything to the individuals. But I'd say most importantly, like if you're like, hey, I want to learn more about how the heck that's possible, what Sami just said, just go on Google Virta Health and you'll find a ton of information for free.
And then check with your employers, see if they are affiliated with Virta Health at all, if this is something that's interesting to you. But yeah, go to their website, check out their YouTube, because it's going to have a lot better tips than the American Diabetes Association, which is still recommending eating oatmeal and orange juice for breakfast. So here we are. Sami, thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate you, brother.
Thank you, Nate.